The Marvels released in theaters last week, and as I am sure everyone has heard countless times already, it is underperforming at the box office, and just another misfire for the MCU. But why is that exactly? In this video, I'll be breaking down the litany of reasons that the film is flopping, my personal thoughts on the film, and the current state of the MCU, and my hopes for what the future holds of a franchise that I still love. The film opened at the US domestic box office with $47 million in its opening weekend. This is the worst debut in MCU history domestically. This means it opened below 2008's The Incredible Hulk, which made $60 million, as well as 2015's Ant-Man, which made $57.2 million. With international territories, it brought in $63.3 million, giving it a worldwide haul of $110 million. With an estimated $220 million budget and another estimated $100 million promotional budget, the film is looking to be a major financial disappointment for Marvel Studios and Disney. Marvel movies tend to be front-loaded. Look at this year's Quantumania, that debuted with $106 million, but teetered out at just $476 million worldwide. For people that saw the Marvels, word of mouth is also mixed, same as its reviews. On Rotten Tomatoes, it holds a fresh score of 62% and an average rating of 5.9 out of 10. Some have pointed out that another Disney release from this year, Elemental, also opened poorly and was written off as a flop on arrival, but it legged out and made $495 million worldwide. But it's worth noting that this film was still more positively received than the Marvels was, and Pixar is far more known for its legs than the MCU typically is, and that its overall box office wasn't a real success. It just prevented it from being a major failure. Only time will tell what the Marvels is capable of, but these numbers are definitely not what the studio hoped for. But that just leads to a lot of questions. Why is it underperforming? The first and most obvious reason is misogyny. Plenty of people have entirely justifiable reasons to not love this movie. Reasons I will delve into when I speak of my own opinions later. But a clear and present reason is misogyny. Brie Larson herself riles up a toxic response from many men, and it is worth noting that despite its box office success, the first Captain Marvel film received so much unwarranted hate from man babies that Rotten Tomatoes had to change the way it accepted reviews, as it experienced unprecedented levels of review bombing. The film was moderately received by critics overall, but in the hype between Infinity War and Endgame, the MCU was at an all-time high. And for many, getting Academy Award winner Brie Larson to portray a character that was heavily teased in Infinity War's post-credit scene was exciting. Since then, the unwarranted hatred that Brie faces has not really decreased. And now the film stars two other women and is solely directed by a woman, and had plenty of fragile men preying on its downfall. Did Barbie break all sorts of records and do well this year despite women being the primary target audience? Yes, it did. And alongside the Eras Tour from Taylor Swift really highlights how overlooked and under-catered to female-driven films are. But the MCU isn't a franchise solely targeted to women, and the unfair lack of interest from men and women for this film plays a role. Some will deny that misogyny has anything to do with it, yet the plethora of tweets and videos covering this film paints a completely different picture. The second reason kind of plays into this in some ways, and that is racism. This is a reason I've seen getting the most pushback, yet in the wake of anti-wokeness, diversity of any sort is seen by a shockingly large number of people as a bad thing. I'm sure this aspect does lend itself to the aforementioned misogyny, but it also brings with it racist vitriol towards director Nia DaCosta and stars Iman Vellani and Teyonah Parris. In conjunction with misogyny, there's also only one true male lead in the film in the form of Samuel L. Jackson, who is still only a supporting role and, of course, another person of color. So, movie bad, I guess. Like misogyny, many deny this is a factor in its failure, but plenty of the responses to this film say otherwise, and it is one that I feel can't go unstated. I mean, how many people even know that this film had the highest opening weekend for a film directed by a black woman? How is that success for a film still leaning positive in terms of reviews and reception not one of the primary topics of conversation this weekend, like at all? I think the reasons are pretty clear. The third major reason is MCU fatigue. This is the 33rd film in the MCU and the 42nd project overall since 2008, but nearly half of these projects have come out in only the last 3 years. Some of my favorite MCU projects have come out in this time frame, like No Way Home, WandaVision, Loki, and Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. But for all the great we've gotten, we've also gotten a lot more polarizing, forgettable, and outright disliked projects too. If this was over the span of a decade, like the first half of the MCU, it may not be as big of an issue. Sure, something like Secret Invasion would still be a stain on the franchise, in my opinion, no matter what. But it would be easier to bounce back from a Quantumania without as much disinterest if everything still felt like an event. But it doesn't anymore. There's simply too much inconsistency and frequency to their projects, and general audiences are losing interest. Captain Marvel wasn't a hugely well-received film by MCU fans, and was, like I said, bolstered by Endgame and Infinity War excitement. A benefit that the Marvels doesn't have is the multiverse saga as a whole has been mostly a disappointment to many in a way previous phases, and the Infinity Saga just wasn't. No Way Home is an outlier. Spider-Man carries with him his own built-in franchise and fan base that is almost autonomous to the MCU at this point. And Guardians is similar, much like Deadpool was to X-Men films, Guardians films are to the MCU. But even then, despite how loved Volume 3 seems to be, it still grossed less than its predecessor. Personal opinion means very little when it is clear audience disconnect and dwindling interest in a franchise as a whole are existent. And building off of that further, WandaVision was watched by a lot of people, and Miss Marvel was watched by significantly less. And there's a growing number of people becoming disinterested in keeping up. Despite the fact the MCU has always had interconnectivity and usually handles it pretty well, this is the first film to act as a semi-sequel to 2 Disney Plus shows, as well as a film. It created a barrier that some people didn't feel like overcoming. But the MCU isn't alone in growing disinterest and disillusionment. On top of this MCU fatigue, we also see a growing disillusionment with the Disney company as a whole. This entire year has seen the company see disappointment after disappointment. Haunted Mansion, Quantumania, and Indiana Jones were all huge investment losses, and even Disney Plus is seeing viewership struggle. Despite the success story of what Elemental ended up doing, it still is one of the lower grossing Pixar films, and the fact that that was a topic of conversation at all is something that we wouldn't have seen from the Pixar brand pre-pandemic. The company overall has had one of its most tumultuous years to date, riddled with controversy and backlash, none of which was helped by Bob Iger's reported role in the writer's strike, and another brief reason, but notable one, is the Screen Actors Guild strike. The Marvels is the only MCU film to have its entire promotional campaign and release coincide with the actor strike. It may not have saved the film entirely, but getting someone like Iman on the press circuit with her infectious enthusiasm for the MCU may have at least helped to increase interest. This is the variable we know the least on how it impacted the film, but it is still a relatively big one worth noting. The final, and arguably the most important role in this film, is the film itself, the reviews, the reception to it. One of the biggest and most pivotal reasons for the film's underperformance has to probably be the quality of the film itself. Coming at a time of MCU fatigue and being a sequel to an already more polarizing film, and with all the other aforementioned factors at play, that means the Marvel was always going to be fighting an uphill battle. An incredible film with glowing, near unanimous praise may have helped boost interest, but unfortunately this film is not that. To elaborate on that a little bit, I will give my personal thoughts on this film, which are mixed to say the least. I love the chemistry between the leads. Monica's given the least to do, but even she still shines in this film. All the actresses brought the charisma and nuance necessary for their characters to feel real and to feel likable. I also thought that Nia DaCosta's directing was a highlight, not just in what she brought out of her performers, but the way the camera and its movement and the scenes themselves captured even the tiniest of beats so near perfectly. I will avoid spoilers here, but a subtle moment with Iman's Miss Marvel was a standout to me, as well as some more melancholic moments with Monica and Carol. The action is also super kinetic and fun, and for me, some of the most memorable action in the entire MCU. The flaws with the film, I think overall, are the writing and the editing. The plot itself is both confusing and simple. You can pick up the pieces to follow along, but there's just a shallowness to it all. There are plenty of scenes that just feel completely disjointed and disconnected from each other in ways that make them memorable and for all the wrong reasons. The editing and pacing, while kinetic and brisk, also causes a lot of these disjointed feelings. This is the shortest MCU film to date, and it doesn't feel like it was intended to be, as more than ever the reshoots and cuts feel obvious, and you can tell that moments were removed. Maybe I'm crazy, and repeat viewings and comments can tell me if I am wrong, but I feel there were some odd continuity issues in the clothing during a lot of the film. Something small but glaring for me. The film also could have benefited from another 10 minutes or so to give us more character stuff from the villain Dar-Ben, as well as from Bree's Captain Marvel. And going back again to the feeling of disjointedness, the film's briskness and ambition in following up 3 shows and a movie makes the entire film feel like a series finale in many ways, and not all of it works. You're actually worse off if you have seen Secret Invasion, in my opinion, and far better for having seen Miss Marvel. As for Dar-Ben, the performance is good, and there are the makings of a more nuanced and interesting villain motivations buried under the plot, but the plot and structure don't lend the film to exploring them in truly meaningful ways. Despite these flaws, though, by the time the film was done, I still found myself satisfied. It was fun and vibrant enough to keep me thoroughly entertained, a benefit of its runtime and pacing, but also flawed enough to make me noticeably indifferent to the plot and wanting more character moments from all the leads, a downside to its runtime and pacing and perhaps for the writing as a whole. For me, its good outweighs its bad, but more than ever, I can see why it won't be for some people. In terms of the grander MCU, it is still in the lower half of my ranking. Sheer enjoyment makes it a step up from its predecessor, as well as from sequels like Iron Man 2, The Dark World, or even the Ant-Man sequels, but it also lacks the necessary weight and ingredients for it to reach the heights it could have had. I think it's around a 6, maybe a 6.5 out of 10 for me, and a far cry from the disaster it is being painted as, but is not without criticism either. With the MCU in a state of disarray, a state of dwindling interest, and a state of inconsistency, this is not the film that Marvel would want to release right now. One that, despite all its unfair hurdles, is the best representation of what the brand and what the franchise should be. It has glaring issues, in some ways some of the biggest out of any MCU film, and even though it is enjoyable and I do like it, I can see how it will lead to even further disinterest in the MCU, even further room for criticism, which overall I think is unfortunate. I do hope the MCU brand can rebuild itself, restructure itself, and regain a sense of what worked before, while still continuing to be diverse and innovative and switching the formula. There is a balance to be had. They've come close to it, but ultimately I think it just falls down to quality control. I just think they're spreading themselves too thin too quickly, and we're losing a sense of quality control. But still, let me know, what do you think about the Marvels? What do you think about the MCU? Are there more reasons that I forgot to mention? Do you disagree with some of my reasons? Let me know down in the comment section below.